Hello everybody, welcome to Dungeons & Drams. Like I mentioned in last week's video, this video is going to be kind of fun. We're just going to create some monsters. I have been thinking for the last few days about what I'd like to create. And when I think about Halloween, I usually think like pumpkins, of course. And so I kind of went with a bit of a cliche, like pumpkin patch. But I started thinking, what legends or what things related to the pumpkin patch could I create monsters out of? Now, obviously pumpkins are one of them, but there's a few other things. So let's go over and I'm just going to show you my little scribbled out ideas, and then we're going to take it into ChatGPT. We're going to flesh them out. We're going to give them stat blocks. Then we're going to go over to Midjourney and we're going to create some character artwork for these. As always, all of this will be available on my Patreon under the free tier. However, I'm also going to make tokens and kind of stat these things out with, I'll export some JSON and such for those of you that are in the paid tier in case you decide that you want to use these or just check out what I've done. All right, let's go over to the other screen. The first monster that I wanted to create is something based off of a jack-o'-lantern, right? But I don't want to do just like a pumpkin that's lit up from the inside. I wanted to base this off the legend of Jack-o'-lantern, which is this guy Stingy Jack. Now, if you're not familiar with the legend, you should check it out. I'm not going to go too much into it here, but the long story short is there was this really stingy guy that tricked the devil into not taking his soul a few times and ultimately was punished for it. So what I want to do is I want to have kind of like a sentry, somebody who could guard or maybe walk around and really make the players have to time where they're moving. So think about a lot of video games that you've played where you kind of have to move and you don't want to get seen. There's going to be a couple of these jack-o'-lantern guys, and we'll come up with a good name for them. But I wanted to make them headless zombie-like creatures that's more of a sentry carrying a lantern. Okay, easy. I imagine that your notes probably don't look a whole lot different than this when you're ideating. So next is going to be the Hallowed Husk. I don't care about the name. I might come up with something different. That was just kind of the idea that I came up with because I want it to be, I actually kind of more was thinking like hollow, kind of a play on words here. Something similar to a shambling mound, except made out of pumpkins and vines and other rot that's in the pumpkin patch. So the Hallowed Husk. Then I wanted some sort of a vine creature. This is more of a trap that can grab people and pull them underground. So like I said, more of a trap, so less of a creature, but I might still make some artwork for it. Then pumpkin sprites. I thought this would be something interesting. I was thinking about how pumpkins will have the little light inside of them, and then I started thinking, I'm like, what else could create that light? Well, maybe like a little sprite. So let's give them some sort of a fire-based magic. But then I was like, how can they be even more annoying? Other than just maybe playing a trick or two on the player, up to the DM's discretion, I thought it would be interesting if many of them could kind of swarm a player, grab onto them, and just explode. Now, I've been replaying Subnautica lately, and for anybody who knows that game, there's a monster called a crash fish, or it's a fish called a crash fish, and it swims at you and it explodes. I've also been playing Minecraft, and creepers are a thing. So maybe I just have things that attack you and explode on the mind. Then, of course, we're going to have some sort of a legendary rotting pumpkin monster. That's going to be kind of your big bad, or your final boss or whatever. Some sort of scarecrow concept. I'm not quite sure what I want to do with that, but I think, I don't know, maybe they utilize minions as crows more so than anything. And I don't really know that, I don't know. I think of the old R.L. Stine books with, there was one about Scarecrow that would come off and it would like go attack kids or something like that. There's something there, but we might save that one for last because I'm not like loving the idea. It's just an idea. Next is a pumpkin that acts like a mimic and a slime. So the idea being that it's going to be a mimic. So, you know, the thing that makes it different than just a mimic is that when you slice it or hurt it, it's going to act more like a slime, or an ooze, I should say, where it splits. I think that's a yellow ooze that does that. And then lastly, there's going to be a creature that attaches to a player's head and then dominates them. Another pumpkin kind of thing where this creature leaps on and puts, covers the person's head and controls their actions for a little while. Now that we know roughly what we want to make, here's our initial prompt. I'm a dungeon master running Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I want to make a few monsters that will be found in a pumpkin patch. I have ideas for the monsters and will give them to you one at a time. I'd like you to use the following template to output the monster. I may give you some or all of its information. Obviously, I have some ideas, but I don't know everything. Now, you can read through this or go check out the Patreon post. I'm not going to go through all of that. The important part is this last line here. Do you understand? If so, I will describe my first creature. I don't want it to do it for me, so hopefully it picks up on that. Let's start off with our jack-o'-lantern concept. So the idea I came up with while I was typing here, the first monster is going to be a headless zombie-like creature that's based off the story of Stingy Jack. This monster will act like a sentry and will guard the entrance to the pumpkin patch. I'd like there to be some roleplay where the players need to sneak past the creature. Additionally, I'd like it if the players could extinguish the monster's lantern, causing it confusion or urging it to find another one of its kind to relight its lantern. So the name is not something I will keep, but I'm going to end up working on that kind of offline. There's no reason to kind of go into that. So the concept and theme, a headless zombie like sentry cursed to guard the pumpkin patch. It searches endlessly for a light, a remnant of the spirit of Stingy Jack. So, I mean, it took what I said. I just didn't want it to be quite so literal. Oh well. It has a physical description, it has a role and a challenge, stealth roleplay focused encounter with potential combat. The Sentinel is an undead guardian with a dim perception but acute awareness of changes in light, especially its lantern. So there's a few other things that I have as part of this template that, again, not going to go ahead and read, but we will utilize those when we go over to Midjourney to create some of these images. All right, it has some weaknesses, it has some lore, the reward, a carved lantern that repels undead when lit, usable by the players. The effect is limited to 3 uses. That's not terrible. Maybe they could use that to keep away other ones of these creature. That's something interesting. I might reduce it just to 1 because this is probably going to be a one-shot. But either way, that's something we could figure out later. We've got some phrases here that we could use while we're playing. That's something I really like because it gives you more insight into how this generative AI thinks that this should be played. And then we also have our stat blocks. So all of this will be in some way, shape, or form on the Patreon, whether it's a paid post or the free one. So go check that out. It does have some abilities here which are in line with what we were asking. So the Cursed Lantern basically can be put out with water or strong wind. If it goes out, it's confused for 2 turns as it searches for light. The Rekindling Gaze, as an action, the Sentinel may ignite another lantern if within 10 feet of one, restoring its sense of purpose. So maybe you do kind of have these guys working together. But either way, we'll figure that out. And then, of course, it has Undead Fortitude. And since this guy is working more as a sentry, it does only have a claw attack, which I wish it had maybe a little bit more, and I could certainly add something more. But I see this more as it alerting other people or other creatures, so you don't want to get seen. Up next is going to be our Hallowed Husk. So this next creature is going to be called a Hallowed Husk. It's going to be similar to a shambling mound, but will be comprised of rotting pumpkins, vines, and other vegetation that can be found in the pumpkin patch. Not a big surprise, considering I did basically tell it to reskin the shambling mound, but this is very similar. The only difference really is that it says it's suggested adventurer level 4, whereas I know that a shambling mound is a CR 5. So maybe this is a little bit weaker or something like that, has some slightly, yeah, it does have less hit points. So that might be why. It has the Rotten Embrace, which it can pull things into it and do some damage. So obviously Shambling Mound. The only other thing is the Putrid Blast, which I like. This has a recharge on it. Always fun. It releases a burst of foul spores in a 15-foot radius, and they have to roll against it, otherwise they're poisoned. I like that because it takes the Shambling Mound and then makes it rotten, which is adding the poison. I think that's clever. So the next creature is going to be Pumpkin Sprites. So I said they emerge from pumpkins using fire magic and hypnotic pattern, and ultimately grabbing adventurers and exploding. They'll be fey creatures and chaotic, causing trouble as well as attacking if approached. Now, I mentioned that I would like them to work best in a swarm, so I'm curious if it will actually create them as a swarm. I do think that I would probably play them that way and, attack with them as a swarm, but maybe not. I'm not entirely sure, actually, thinking about this, because it'd be harder to create trouble if they were a swarm, but it'd be easier to fight with them. Maybe they become a swarm if there's so many of them left. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. So it created my pumpkin sprites, and something that I think is interesting, it made them have pumpkin heads. So I thought about this at first, and I was like, I don't really like that because I don't want them to just have pumpkin heads. But then I was thinking, you know what? They're little fairies. Maybe they're just wearing the pumpkins on their heads. Little tiny pumpkins. I don't know. Why not? Fiery eyes, spindly vine limbs. Their heads glow from within, casting an eerie orange light. Okay, well that's pretty interesting. Primarily swarm attackers and chaotic distractors. They use hypnotic pattern to daze adventurers and fiery bursts of damage and spread disarray. Okay, not a big surprise. Being a fire creature, they have weakness against water and ice attacks. They get extinguished, actually, causing them to vanish with a smoky hiss. Okay, that's cool. So if you think to extinguish them, they actually just disappear, which could save you quite a bit of pain. I like that a lot, actually. Interesting role-playing opportunities. If you are of Fey background, you could potentially attempt to reason with them, which is cool. Or if you want to cover up your lights or use water, you could prevent the sprites from even approaching you. So this is interesting. They only have 5 hit points, so that makes sense because they're probably going to swarm. Let's see. They have an explosive embrace, which ends up doing 4 fire damage and destroying itself with a small burst within 5-foot radius. Okay, so 4 damage is not terrible, but if you have like 5 or 6 of these things, suddenly you're taking 20, 24 damage. Okay, that's not terrible, and a lot of hypnotic patterns. That could be a pain. Face Step, as a reaction, it can briefly vanish and reappear within 5 feet of a nearby pumpkin. That's cool. Swarm Tactics, if 3 or more sprites occupy the same 10-foot square, they can act as a swarm with advantage on all attacks. Perfect, that's exactly what I was hoping for. I really like this idea of giving it what I want and then letting it figure out the crunchy bits. Now, that is fun too, but if you have to come up with everything yourself, you're going to be taking all day. And that's okay if that's what you're into. For me, I'd rather kind of get my idea down and go play. The more I think about this legendary pumpkin monster, the more I want to add to it, but then I kind of think, like, how much is too much, right? So I love the idea of using minions, but we already kind of have the pumpkin sprites, or the pumpkin fairies, I forget what they're called, pumpkin sprites. But then we also could have those pumpkin oozes. Maybe it calls things forward, maybe it uses vines, maybe it does whatever. So here's what I came up with. Let's create a boss monster of this pumpkin patch. This is going to be a legendary rotting pumpkin monster. It should have legendary attacks that allow it to use its vines to attack or grab players. It should be able to use a breath weapon of fire similar to a dragon. I don't want it to be able to move, but it should have some way of repelling players who get too close. I'd like it to have extra attacks or abilities when it reaches half health. And of course it gave us the Great Gourd. Now I would probably change it to have more of like an infernal sounding name, probably give it a title of some sort. Maybe it would be like Pumpakis the Great Gourd, you know, I don't know, that's stupid, but you get what I'm going for. Alright, so it's a massive mobile decaying pumpkin entity animated by foul magic and malevolent fey spirits. It serves as the heart of the cursed pumpkin patch, lashing out with vine tendrils, breathing waves of fire, and growing more powerful as it's damaged. The physical description, roll and challenge, blah, 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 blah. All of this stuff is great. It does suggest for role-playing opportunities that it might taunt the players, which I think I would probably come up with a few taunts here, and I would absolutely use it. It's got 225 hit points, pretty decent stats here. It's not very smart, but that's okay. At least it's got half decent wisdom, so it's not going to just fail everything. It has... all right, here's the legendary actions. So it has a Vine Lash, which is something you're used to. It does 12 damage. Gourd Repel. So this is something it can use. It could use 3 legendary actions per round. So it's going to lash you with its vines. It's going to maybe grapple you, and it's going to repel. So you have to make a strength save. Otherwise, you get pushed back 10 feet. This is going to stop all of your melee fighters from just getting right up next to it and just beating the heck out of it. I think that's great because that's something that could definitely make this fight less awesome. So the grappling root summons thorny roots in a 10-foot radius. Creatures within that area must succeed on a dex saving throw or be restrained until they escape with a 15 strength athletics check. So you're going to surround people with thorns. I think that's cool. I would probably add maybe a little bit of damage there, but maybe not. Breath of Infernal Flame. So here's your breath weapon. Roots of Retribution. When a creature hits the gourd with a melee attack, it takes 5 necrotic damage from its corrupted sap. I think that's pretty neat as well. Maybe I would let people become immune to that, maybe not, I don't know. It really depends on what level my players are going to be. And this says that this should be for a level 8 adventuring party, so maybe they have a little bit more hit points. And once it becomes bloodied, it's going to get Vine Flurry, which gives it a couple extra attacks with its vines per turn. It also has the Death Blossom, which is something that it basically just spits out a plumage of poisonous spores for 20-foot radius. And then it has a Vine Slam. So I would probably I think I would really enjoy playing this. I would want it to have one more action though. Like the Vine Slam is fine. The Vine Lash and the Gourd Repel and the Grappling Root are all fine. I just kind of want something else. And I'm not sure what that is, but it's something I could think about. I had a few more options, but rather than kind of sitting through all of that, let's go over to Midjourney and let's create some images. We're going to start off with Stingy Jack Sentinel here. What I like to do is you could either grab the descriptive text and just use that by itself, or you could do the physical description and obviously you could change things. So let's go and just take the descriptive text and see what we get. You can see that I was creating the background for this. So we're going to imagine our prompt. A tall, headless figure stands at the edge of the pumpkin patch, clutching a dimly flickering lantern. Its body is twisted, vines and roots acting as sinew binding together its decaying form. The scent of moldy earth and rotting vegetation hangs in the air as it stirs, sensing the slightest shift in light or movement. So I'm going to get rid of this bit right here because it's not really related to the visual of the creature. Now it says, despite its lack of eyes, the creature's hollow carved pumpkin head seems to scan the night. I don't want it to have a pumpkin head. I want it to carry a lantern, and I want it to have a blue flame. Something I always try to do is add some descriptors at the end. So I say fantasy, monster, horror, scary, and imposing. Let's see what we get. Something I've also actually learned while we're running this, something I've learned is that you usually want to do this a few times in a row. Even if it seems like you are going to get what you want, just do it like 3 times and then see what you get. You're going to get 12 different options, and then you can kind of go from there. Looking at these, it did not do a very good job of making it headless. I do like the concept, especially of something like this, or maybe, well, I guess probably the top one. That's not gonna work for you guys. I like this top one, but it has a head, and that's not what I want. I also want it to look more zombie-ish. So I'm gonna abandon the descriptor that it gave me, and I'm gonna write my own. So we're gonna try a different prompt here. A tall zombie-like figure, so I want it to be more of a zombie. No head, standing on the edge of a pumpkin patch, clutching a dimly flickering lantern with a blue flame within. Its body is twisted, vines and roots acting as sinew binding together its decaying form. Fantasy, monster, horror, scary, imposing. So I took about half of what it gave me as far as the prompt, and we'll see what this does. Now, Midjourney may just have some like filters in place to make things always have to have a head. If that's the case, then I guess I'll just deal. Yeah. So again, they all have heads, and that was about as clear as it could have been. I said headless, right? So in this case, I guess I'm just kind of going to go with something that I think looks pretty cool. In this case, this is where Photoshop comes in. So let me pick one that I think looks pretty cool. I think I like this top left one, or maybe, do I like the bottom right one? I think I like the bottom right one the most. So I'm going to upscale that. Just making sure. Oh, that bottom left one looks good too. Ooh, I kind of like that. The top right one's good too. So many of these are good. So, all right, let's just pick one. I'm going to pick the top right one here. I think that looks really cool and kind of creepy. It also looks to me like it could probably be hanging around in the pumpkin patch for a long time, just standing there almost as if a tree. So what I'll probably do is I'll take this into Photoshop, I'll remove the head, and then I'll end up using the generative AI that it has within Photoshop to just fill in the back. And that's all it will take. So I think that's great. I'm going to take this guy. He's going to be my little spooky guy. Up next, we're going to take our Hallowed Husk. So we're going to grab our descriptive text again, just to give us a place to start. We're going to go back over to Midjourney. A hulking mound of rotting pumpkins and tangled vines rises from the pumpkin patch, its many hollowed faces leering with twisted expressions. Love it. The stench of decay fills the air. We'll get rid of that. As it lumbers forward, its vine-like arms stretched out, snapping with a sickly, wet sound. We'll get rid of the last part. Actually, you know what? We'll keep that because that way it knows to kind of make it look like it's wet. The hollowed husk looms with an unsettling sentience, groaning and hissing like the whisper of dead leaves. All right, we'll get rid of that last bit. We'll just keep it looms with an unsettling sentience. And then I added some descriptors of horror, fantasy, monster, hulking, and threatening. Okay, I kind of love the second one here. That's very similar to what I was thinking of. I pictured it a little bit less silly looking, but I think I kind of love that. So I'm not even going to generate more. I'm just going to take that number 2 one, and we're going to upscale that and then save it off. My first attempt at making the pumpkin fairies didn't really go quite well because, as you can see, there's really no mode of like flight here, and I just feel like a fairy should have wings. So I adjusted the prompt a little bit. I took the physical descriptor and I just kind of put it out there. I'll put this up on the Patreon just so I don't have to read it all out. But one thing I did add to it is these creatures should be emerging from half-rotten pumpkins, tricky, mischievous, spooky, threatening. And one thing that is interesting is it really didn't do anything with the pumpkin. I love this little dude on the bottom right. That is absolutely the guy. I think that's perfect. I'm going to try 2 different things here. First, I'm going to take the descriptive text of the Great Gourd, and I'm going to make a prompt off of that. But then I'm also going to take the physical descriptor and make a different prompt off of that one, just to see if we can make it better. I added eerie, threatening, and horrific to the end. And I hate them both. All right, we're going to try writing our own. Let's try this. Horror, fantasy creature, an immense rotting pumpkin with a face carved into its thick skin. The face is grinning and flickering with infernal fire. Around it are vines erupting from the ground menacingly. Wherever it has cracks in its flesh, there is a thick sap-like substance oozing from it. Let's see what this does. These are closer, but I feel like it's lost some of the perspective, and so because of that, it doesn't look nearly as big as it needs to. So I'm going to take that last prompt and I'm going to adjust it again. I mentioned the background. I said it should be basically in an endless pumpkin patch and that the sky should be dark and eerie. So we'll see what it does. I think this bottom right one looks much better. It's got the pumpkins in the foreground. This one's pretty good, but it's just not clear enough. I think I would probably go with this one. Maybe I would adjust it a little bit more if I weren't filming a video. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to grab that last one and that's mine. I think you could see how we could continue to go and make more of these, whatever. I had plenty more ideas, but what I think is important is that you come up with your ideas and then make AI do the parts that you don't want to do, whatever that ends up being. Maybe you don't like coming up with the ideas, but you like to stat things out because you just really like the math. Cool, do that instead. Give me 10 monsters that would be in a pumpkin patch and then go stat them out yourself. Or, come up with all the ideas like I did and then make it do the stat blocks for you. We could all go to the DMG. We could all figure out how to stat these things out, but it's more fun in my mind to come up with the ideas of what's going to make my adventure memorable rather than worrying about how much wisdom my pumpkin head has. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining me here on Dungeons and Drams. I hope you have a great rest of your night and I hope you have a wonderful Halloween. Cheers.